it's still hard. Um, he was such a light in my life and in everyone's lives. And I think I don't ever really know that you reconcile that, the idea of losing someone you love so much. My childhood was just super happy. And I knew from as long as I could remember that my dad was gay. And that was a non-issue as a kid. We all lived together. My mom and dad were best friends. So they lived together because they were both teachers, and divorce was kind of hard to afford. And they just really loved each other's company. So we all lived together until I think I was about 6 or 7. And then my dad decided to get an apartment in Lower Queen Anne. And then he lived there with his boyfriend. And then my mom lived with her boyfriend. And we went back and forth every 2 weeks, but it was no big deal because it was just 4 blocks. And so it was just growing up, it was just always love. My whole house was always filled with love. First time that we were aware of really AIDS, because that's what we had called it in our family in the time, and I'm talking about like early 80s, was when my dad got sick. And I don't remember the year. I was young, so anywhere from 81 to 83. And my mom was studying abroad, and my dad was taking care of us, and he was so sick he couldn't take care of us. We had to go to my aunt's house, and then he just miraculously got better, but no one could figure out what was going on. So I think that was the first clue to us. We learned that my dad had AIDS in, the fall of 1987. It was HIV testing had just become readily available, if I remember, a year or two earlier. And he had said, to my mom, again, not to us because I was, 8 at the time, I think this is probably what I have. And my mom said, yeah, that's probably what you have. So we knew something was going on. And then he sat us down. He was over at my mom's house, and he sat us down on the couch. It was my sister. I was 10, she was 8, and it was my mom and my dad. And he told us that he had AIDS and that he was going to die. And we knew what AIDS was. We knew what that meant. And so that was obviously devastating. I don't think I've cried that hard in my life. But he was a teacher. So he used that opportunity to teach us and to teach others. And as a teacher, he really saw a need for, there was no literature at the time for kids. And he was a Seattle public school teacher. And so he reached out to the Seattle public schools and he said, we need to have education for kids on HIV and AIDS. And so they said, great, you want to help us write it? And so he did. And so he wrote the first flash curriculum that's taught in the Seattle public schools on HIV and AIDS education. And he was too nervous to have his name on it because he was still alive and we were still alive, and there was still such a stigma in some places about having AIDS. And so his name isn't on it that he wrote it, but it's dedicated to him. The curriculum is dedicated to him. He was actually a kindergarten teacher in the Seattle public schools. And he was one of the first teachers in the Seattle public schools to come out as being gay and having AIDS. And I remember when he came out to the school and he had a big meeting at the school to tell everyone that he had AIDS. It was actually in the front page of the Seattle Times. And they had titled the article, "A Lesson in Caring." And we were so nervous as a family about that meeting and what was going to happen at that meeting. And instead what happened is we saw the community coming together to support my dad. He was a beloved kindergarten teacher. Once we found out that my dad had AIDS, um, so I was 10, there, for the most part, he was still healthy, he was still teaching. And then a couple months later, he got sick with pneumonia. And we didn't think he was gonna make it. And the really great thing that happened was that everybody in the community, all of his elementary students, all of his kindergarten students and their families came to help us sit with him in the hospital. They brought him food because they knew that my dad adored chocolate and that he was not going to get that in the hospital. And so they came and they brought him food, and they weren't afraid to sit with him in the hospital. And this was at the time where, you had big signs on the door that almost covered the entire door that said, HIV patient, enter with caution. He got well enough that he was able to come home from the hospital. And then I think that was in the spring of 88. And then he was well enough that he decided to go back to teaching another year. And then in the fall of 88, he got sick again with pneumonia, and he went to the hospital again. And then in the winter of 89, that's when his hospital stints, he was getting better and he was about to be released. And then they gave him some antipsychotic medication. I think it was Haldol for some reason. And he had ripped his IVs out, and he was trying to find help to get his IVs in, and was calling the nurses, and no one was coming. And he ended up trying to he got out of his hotel or his hospital bed and was trying to find help. So he was going throughout the hospital, and he couldn't find anyone that could help him. And they found him the next morning, passed out in the stairway. And just telling that story just hurt so much, that there wasn't anyone to really help him. Because I'm sure there were people to help him, but maybe there was fear to help him. I'm not sure. And I don't know what was running through people's minds. But they found him the next day, and he turned out to be okay. There was another month in the hospital before he was able to come back after that. And that really broke him mentally. He had a really hard time because he was so upset that he had bled everywhere. And he was so worried about infecting people. My mom was dating someone, and we realized that he couldn't live by himself. So it was my elementary school and the elementary schools he taught at all came together, and we had, like, my mom says there was anywhere from 40 to 60 people at my dad's house, and they just packed up the whole house for us. And they moved him to my mom's house. So in my mom's house, it was me, my sister, my dad, my mom, and my soon-to-be stepdad. And we all lived there together, all getting along and loving each other. In fact, my stepdad and my dad became best friends. So my mom got she got a hospital bed, and we put it in a room. And then my sister and I were in the room next door to him. And then we just took care of him. And we had a lot of help. The Chicken Soup Brigade came over and helped us figure out how to build a ramp so that we could get him in a wheelchair up the stairs. So he was just sick all the time. And he was he was not a skinny man per se. He was not entirely overweight either, but we estimate that when he died, he was probably about 5'7". We think he probably weighed about 80 pounds. He was just basically a skeleton with skin. And I remember the day that he died, I just had this feeling that I should stay home. And so I stayed home. And I stayed home with him, and I just sat with him, and I played video games and talked to him about video games. It was like the NES Nintendo had just come out, and we were playing Super Mario Brothers, and we used to play it together, but he was too sick for that. So I played and told him about all my moves and what I was doing, and he would just grab my hand and squeeze it and look at me, which was all he could do. And then I remember that night we invited my aunt over. She was a nurse at the time. She's a physician now, and she was one of his best friends, and we knew he wasn't going to be alive much longer. So she came over, and we all told him that we loved him, and we all had to go up there and tell him goodbye. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And we all told him it was okay to go. And each of us, one by one, my sister, me, my stepdad, my mom, my aunt, we all went up there and told him that. And within the next hour, he passed. And I remember, I can't remember if it was my sister or me. We're both science oriented. So we needed to get a stethoscope. We needed to, as small kids, she was 10, I was 12. We needed to know that he was dead. We didn't believe it. So we got a stethoscope, and we couldn't hear his heart anymore. And I just remember my sister screaming. And then we just all hugged each other, and I needed to do something. So I called everyone as a 12-year-old, everyone we knew, just to let them know that he had passed. Knowing my father, loving him, watching him die of AIDS, I think has, as much as I hate to say this, it's made me who I am. And I love who I am. I think I'm a caring and empathetic person, and I think he taught me that. And I don't really want to change who I am. I'd take him back in a heartbeat and rather have the time with him, of course. But I think that's what I take from all of this, is to learn that love and empathy is the answer to everything.